right, who's very young. As parents, as uncles, as aunts, as grandmas and grandpas, we have responsibilities. This is no different than when we looked at the era of the internet and it's coming out. And my niece, I have to put a lock on the computer, right? There are responsibilities. And within these responsibilities, you have to speak to them. So at the end of the day, when I speak to my niece, I'm like, this is a tool that could be used for good, mostly. But don't forget that there are bad actors in the world. So in this process, I think that we have to educate the, you know, like I remember my parents when they were little talking about the birds and the bees. So think of that also. Let's not be shy to giving the kids the information very early. If not, you know, this is where scammers come in and start to set up things, right? So I always say that talk to the child like she or he's an adult already, and make sure that you're giving them the proper information. Very important.
I'm gonna add a little spin on this for you, X. I want you to come in on this. Is, you know, we may unconsciously assume that people building technologies have our best interest at heart. Unconsciously, because we just download apps and use them. You know,
that's very cutesy.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was, I heard you mention it, there was an app, I think it was Juno, that monitored like women's menstrual cycles, and it was built by 2 men. And that's a lot, big controversy around that. And that data is then sold to other companies. How do you advise us to approach new technologies safely, but still intentionally to make sure we're not left behind?
So I think that one, we have to remember that all technologies that come out of American companies are built inside of capitalism. And capitalism is a gladiator sport, right? It is not a, we care about the earth, let's hold the hands and kumbaya. It is a gladiator sport. It is kill or be killed. It is, we are doing everything we can to make money. And this is legally reinforced by a concept called fiduciary duty. And fiduciary duty requires that anyone that is a director or above at a publicly traded company, usually a Delaware C Corp, I'm not gonna get into all the logistics, but basically anyone who's a manager at one of these big companies has a legal and personal responsibility to make the company money. And if they make decisions that don't make the company money, then they're personally and legally responsible for it. So let's say you're building a technology and you have a choice with the $1 million budget you've been given to build a new feature that will work really well for Black Americans, or build a new feature that's gonna work really well for Native Americans. Well, Native Americans are a smaller percentage of the population than Black folks. So you might go invest that because it's the right thing to do, because your app don't work for that community, and then personally be responsible for paying that $1 million back to the company, and be legally held responsible because you did something that might have been the right thing but didn't make money. So we just have to be real about any of these technologies that come out are built in that environment, right? And so two, how do we approach new technologies in a way to make sure that they're built for us? Well, there are 2 levers we can pull. The first is education, like Wyclef talked about. We can make sure that we're aware of the fact that these technologies are oftentimes not built with people who look like us in the room, or even built with us in mind. And we can be aware of that and, you know, use the features and functionalities they have to report things when they go bad. The second lever that we have is policy. And policy, I want us to rethink of it as boundaries. Now, companies, because they have to do everything they can to make money, they're not necessarily gonna slow down and always do the right thing, unless there's gonna be a punishment on the other end if they don't, right? And that's where policy comes in, rules and regulations. So I'll give you an example, $1 billion by the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission, because they had the Alexa, when they had children's recordings, so like a kid would say, hey Alexa, or ask Alexa something, they were keeping them. Even after parents had asked it to be deleted. And then they told the FTC, no, we actually had deleted those voice recordings, but they actually hadn't. And so, do you think $25 million is enough of a fine for keeping your child's data for a multi-billion-dollar company? Do you think that's gonna stop them from doing that in the future? Right? And so that's where policy comes in. We need to have laws that punish the companies for when they make decisions that are actually harmful and hurtful, and Europe has a really good model for that. Now on top of that, on a personal level, there are 2 things that we have to do. Wyclef mentioned the education piece. You gotta teach your kids about it. The other is that you as parents, or as aunties and uncles, you also have a responsibility to use the tools inside of the apps and inside of these platforms that help you guide your child's experience in a way that is appropriate for children. So a very popular app you may or may not have heard of, YouTube. A few years ago, they had a massive scandal called Elsagate. You can look it up, like Elsa from Frozen, where on YouTube Kids, people were making these crazy cartoons, but it was like Spider-Man beating up Elsa, like violent videos that ended up inside of YouTube Kids. So then they had to go back and delete all the YouTube Kids videos and basically reset what ended up getting on YouTube Kids. Well, my question is, they did all that work to put together YouTube Kids at a level where you can make sure the content is appropriate, but how many of your kids are just using regular YouTube? How many of you have the family account set up? Or how many of you on your routers at home with your Wi-Fi have parental controls where you can watch what your kids are looking at to make sure that they're not going in things that you don't want them to see? So companies will work on this technology to an extent, but we also as individuals have a responsibility to be personally present and accountable and making sure we're using the right features and functions to protect our kids as well.
How can you position a company to X's point of capitalism? How can we do good while doing good?
Well, I just want to say a few things. I feel like I'm sitting next to somebody who's going to be in the history books. Wyclef is already in the history books. But when you think about the last century, and you think about a Fannie Lou Hamer, a Rosa Parks, an Ella Jo Baker. When you think about this century, that's X. I'm realizing you don't understand. This is X. That's who. You're talking about somebody on this stage who was fighting. She doesn't just talk like this around Negroes. She's been hired by the biggest and the best companies and went in there and did real battle and won real battles. AI couldn't even tell the difference between black people and gorillas. She's the they are the person that fixed that whole problem. You won't be able to tell the history of AI without talking about X. I just want to make sure you understand.
Yeah.
And for X to be here, giving you real insight, we have to go win now. We have to go win. Paul Revere has come and given us the call. Now, for the entrepreneurs in particular, I want y'all to make a lot of money. We have to make a lot of money. You mentioned the do good and people call them in politics. I'll get to that. But also, do well. Please do well, because what I've learned in politics is there are 4 corners of power, not just one. I was a part of the Obama administration. We thought that because we had the White House, and God knows I hope that we get it again, that's not the point. But just having the White House is not having power. Just having the White House is not having power. What we discovered when we got to the White House is there was other sources of power that tied that brother up in knots. Number one, Washington, D.C. is political power, but Wall Street is financial power. And that's a whole other source of power that you guys are starting to figure out, and that Earn Your Leisure is really getting us hip to. Another source of power is Hollywood, storytelling, entertainment, all that sort of stuff. Now, we often are the stars, but we don't own the studios. Unless you're Tyler or Oprah, a lot of times you don't own the studio. So we don't have the real power there that we deserve. And then lastly is Silicon Valley, technology. That is the real growing superpower of all the powers that will control the other 3. Technology will control finance, politics, and culture. And so I want you to go there and to win. I want you to go there and to dominate. But before you get there, your existing company needs to win.